Hello and good afternoon, everybody. It is Friday, 12 noon, which means it is Lessons in Leadership. I'm Mary Gregory, and I'm delighted to have you here today to join me with Jody Goldsworthy, who it's just lovely to have you here today, Jody.
Thank you for having me, Mary. It's really lovely to see you.
Well, it's lovely to see you too. And I know Jody from working with Jody at GatenbySanderson, which is where you are executive director of the Leadership and Talent Consultancy. That's a big job.
Yes, and one I really love, actually. I feel very privileged to be able to apply my consultancy skills and background in a sector that I really care a lot about in the public sector. So I do feel that I'm very fortunate to work in an environment that really suits my kind of, my values and what's important to me.
Yes, excellent. Well, I do a lot of work with women leaders, and I look at you and I think you're a great role model of a woman leader in that you have navigated your career, and you're now heading up in a very senior role as executive director, whilst also spinning the plates of parenthood and all the other elements that come to being a woman who's leading in business. I'd like to go right back, though, if you don't mind. If you could just share with us a bit around how you got going and what were your intentions when you set out in your career?
Okay, a little while ago now, but I think that probably like many women that we meet, Mary, I don't think my career was deliberately planned out to a great extent. I think some of the decisions I've made to move roles along the way have been more about being attracted to a role or an opportunity than they have about fulfilling some grand plan. I think probably in recent years, as I've matured and become more senior, there's probably a little bit more planfulness and strategy to that. But I think to begin with, it was quite accidental. So in a nutshell, it started as a graduate in the Australian Civil Service, which is where I was born and bred, in Sydney. Back in the day, and I was working for the Department for Education, recruiting head teachers to both central city and also very remote school locations, and that was a really good learning ground for me, and was a stepping stone really to my realization that I did enjoy working in an HR and learning and development environment.
Yes.
So over the course of the next few years, I had a range of roles. Starting sort of in administrative and low-level management supervisory roles in learning and development, in financial services, in charities, and in the recruitment sector. Actually, I was a recruitment consultant for quite a number of years as well, which, it probably wasn't where I wanted to be for the rest of my career, but boy, did I learn a lot. And I think it gave me a really good grounding in client management and client relationship skills.
Yes. And so you were in the civil service to begin with, which is kind of the public sector. You've then gone through a corporate career. At what point did you come to the UK?
I moved here in 2002, met my Swiss-British husband, and we decided to move here. And at that point, I think I made quite a deliberate decision that I wanted to move out of the recruitment sector and back into the L&OD space that I'd been in. And I secured a contract with B-Sky-B, which is a big FTSE telco company that we all know as a household name. And that was a hugely interesting role, probably the biggest learning curve of my career, actually. I was part of a big transformation project looking at culture change, putting a leadership development curriculum in, putting performance management systems in. So some of that sort of people infrastructure that hadn't been there. And the reason it was such a big learning curve for me was that it was the first time in my career where I'd been directly accountable to a board level sponsor, which at the time I think I was probably capable of doing, but didn't have the confidence around doing. So I guess my self-image hadn't quite caught up with my capability, which I think is a common thing for leaders as they're sort of developing in the early stages of their career. But it was a really fantastic learning opportunity for me.
I love that phrase. My self-image hadn't caught up with my capability, and I think you're right. That is a common thing. How did you get your self-image to catch up, as it were, at that point?
I don't think it did at that point, being honest. I think I did a good job, and I had excellent tutelage from a very experienced learning and development colleague, a lady who remains a sort of an acquaintance and contact of mine, and she was a really great mentor. So I think I threw myself in the deep end and probably felt out of my comfort zone,
Yes.
but still delivered what I had to. And I think probably the turning point for me in terms of that self-image catching up with me was when I moved into management consultancy. So I took a leap from B side B and made a deliberate decision to go into a consultancy environment, and came back to where my roots had become actually in consulting to the public sector, which is a client base I really enjoy working with. You meet some absolutely incredible, very committed, very passionate leaders in that sector. And so I've worked in that environment, that management consultancy environment, for the past 20 years now. Sort of on the other side of the table, advising clients rather than being in an in-house HR role myself.
Yes. Okay, so what I'm hearing is you've had a career that's kind of intertwined public and private experience. Yeah. So I'm always curious as to what can the public sector learn from the private sector and vice versa. From your experience, what do you think are the things that each sector could teach the other?
I think there's an incredible lot, actually. And what's really lovely to see now, I'm in a fortunate position. I work whilst I run a talent consultancy, I work within a headhunting firm, an executive search firm that is a really big player in the public sector. And so I very much see a lot more fluidity between the sectors now, I think. I think in the old days, one was a lifer in the public sector or perhaps never ventured from the private into the public. And I do see a lot more cross-fertilization now, which I think can only be a good thing for both sectors to learn from each other, actually. Our public sector clients, when we're recruiting to senior roles, often ask us for an injection of new commercial skills. They've often got a really big digital transformation agenda, and they're looking for experience leading sort of technological innovation. And often those skills come from the private sector or at least give a different perspective. So, I would always be very cautious not to say that I think public sector leaders lack commerciality, because I've met some incredibly commercially astute public sector leaders. However, I think that different perspective is really important, because often colleagues that come from the private sector have had to deal with different commercial models, whether that's commissioning or outsourcing or mergers and acquisitions, or some of those trends that we see happening in the public sector now. So I think those things can be really beneficial to the public sector. To flip the coin, though, I think what I see in absolute abundance in public sector leaders is what we would call social heart. That real commitment to a cause. And often some incredibly clever, astute, experienced leaders who've made a deliberate decision to stay in the public sector because they are committed to that cause, even though they could potentially earn more money or have, different perks if they were to move across to the private sector. So I do think that sort of social conscious and that, that real focus on outcomes and why things matter is something that the private sector can learn from their public sector counterparts.
So it's not just all about the money, it's about how are you contributing and influencing the bigger community around you as well.
Absolutely. And I feel really fortunate. My company vision or mission is that we find and develop leaders who shape a better society. And actually, I see that playing out every day when I'm working with senior leaders in the public sector. They and their teams are directly impacting us as citizens out in our day-to-day lives, and that's an incredibly important thing to be doing. And we need the very best in leadership roles doing that.
Oh, completely. I mean, you look at what's happened in the last year, and I think certainly I've done some work with local authorities in the last year, and I think they're the unsung heroes of a lot of holding our communities together and supporting our society as we've navigated through the pandemic. Absolutely, they make such a difference, and it's great to be able to contribute to them and their well-being and being able to deliver to their residents and the people that are living in their local authorities.
Absolutely. So it's humbling, actually, because they've had to kind of simultaneously balance planning to bring their business or their organization into a new normal way of working, you know, and get through a crisis for their own organization and take their workforce virtual or whatever it might be, and think about whether their future strategy is the right one. But at the same time, they've had this kind of need to manage a really intense frontline crisis. So
Yes.
I think it's been incredibly humbling to think about, you know, the complexity of those roles in this, you know, in this recent lockdown and crisis.
Yes, and you know, and the things that they're holding, you know, like the homeless still have to be housed, the hungry still have to be fed. That doesn't go away just because there's a pandemic, and
No.
those things don't necessarily get talked about enough. But it's good to know there are people and leaders out there making sure that still happens, which is very different to what leaders in the private sector have had to deal with through the pandemic as well. So can we move a bit into you, Jody, and talk about your role at GatenbySanderson, because you started there in 2016. I mean, what I think is great to speak to you about is that you are in a business building role. So you kind of started, the talent consultancy really didn't exist, or it was only very minuscule when you stepped in there. So can you tell us a bit about the journey of building that practice? Because you started virtually from scratch.
I did, and I did inherit a great team, but I think the services that they were offering were quite narrow. So we were predominantly at that time, there was a team of occupational psychologists who were predominantly supporting their exec search colleagues to run psychometric profiling and give that behavioural insight during recruitment processes. And that's a service that we continue to deliver and that we've scaled pretty incredibly since I joined 5 years ago. But alongside that, the real excitement has been thinking about how we can diversify beyond that, and actually think, well, we're placing some very senior leaders in boardrooms and C-suites around the public sector. How else could we support them around their people agenda, the organisational development needs, the leadership development needs? And so that was part of the attraction for me, was actually to come in. I'm quite motivated by and energised by change and the opportunity to, set things up. And it was a really fortunate position to be in, because we weren't encumbered by any kind of old-fashioned models or legacy ways of doing things. We could really look at what the public sector needed and sort of do our own research that was modern and up to date, and build models and partner with individuals who we thought were best in class. So it was a really daunting but also really exciting opportunity to build a team and to create solutions that we thought were really fit for future. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but there is kind of the benefits of working somewhere where there's a long-standing R&D engine that just fuels the consultancy, but actually some real benefits of agility in having to kind of think differently about it.
Yes. So it sounds incredibly exciting and also very creative, kind of caused you to get the creative juices flowing as well.
It really has. And I think one of the big challenges for us as a business, which is where a lot of my attention has been focused, is that we've effectively got 3 different business models operating within one business. And, everything from the way systems work and the way reporting works to the way we engage with our clients is different, even though we're talking to the same customers. So it's been as much of an opportunity to influence a change agenda internally as it has been to create a service that our clients will and do want to buy.
Yes. So there's the making sure that internally things are taken care of and that the relationships are built, as well as you build the reputation and the relationship with people externally. So many different elements to take on board there, I should imagine, and more complex than you might think as well, is what I'm hearing.
It is, and I think that's, if I reflect on what I've learned as a leader through this latest role, I'm coming up to my 5-year anniversary, and I'm absolutely certain I haven't learned everything that I will learn in this role, because I'm learning all the time. But it's that so I'm the most senior person structurally in my practice, and that's the first time that's ever happened to me in my career. I've worked for bigger talent consultancies where the executive above me or the board above me has been deeply rooted in the expertise of what I do. when I moved to GS, and I do sit on the board at GS, and I've got an executive hat that I wear as well as my functional leadership hat. But I think the thing for me was that, I recognised that I am the most senior talent practitioner within the business. And so it was absolutely critical for me that I surrounded myself with really deeply expert practitioners to join me and work with me, but also that I leverage my network. And I think I've realised that when you get to this point in your career, you're functionally really confident. I know I can lead a consultancy business and set one up and grow it, and we've grown fast. But actually, one needs to put more attention really on managing sideways and upwards, I think, in order to pave the way for the team behind you. That's been a real lesson for me, actually, and something that's been really different about this role compared to the ones I had before.
So and getting that real foundation where you can be sure that those people around you are going to be able to deliver what you need them to deliver, as well as what I'm hearing. I mean, some people talk about the more senior you get, the more isolated you feel. Has that been your experience at all in your role?
I think it has at times, and that's probably what I'm alluding to some extent. I have a very supportive chief exec and non-execs. They're right behind the business driver to set up this practice, and they can see the value it creates for our client base and for our business. So I've had that support there. But I think when it comes to day-to-day issues, one doesn't necessarily have an obvious place to turn sometimes, and that I suppose you could define as being quite isolated at times, or just needing to be creative about where you get that support, which might not be from a traditional hierarchy. That makes sense.
If it's not too cheeky to ask, are you willing to share some of the ways that you get that support when you're being creative to get it?
Yeah, happy to. I think investing more time in an external network of like-minded practitioners. So, whether they're ex-colleagues or people that I've met through the course of my consulting career, but just making a more conscious effort to make time for that networking, because it is a source of energy and new ideas and support. But it's not my natural inclination. I'm very high on achievement. I'm very lead from the front and get on with it. And actually, unless I force myself to make that time for my own support network, to sort of harvest out my own support network, it's probably something I would overlook.
Right.
I've also got a coach. I do lots of coaching for senior leaders across my client base, but actually it's really important, I think, to have that personal support as well. And I really value those conversations in that safe environment where I can, I suppose, just rehearse some of the challenges that I'm experiencing, and get that kind of critical friend and that external perspective on them.
Yeah, very, very important. I think actually the more senior you get, the more important it is to have a coach from that perspective, because of the risk of feeling isolated at times. And it is so useful to have someone to sound off to, and also to share your thinking and stretch your thinking too. So I'm really encouraged to hear you are working with a coach.
I love it. I'd be interested in your perspective, Mary, because I really think that I remember a time when I first started in this game of HR consultancy where clients would perceive receiving coaching as a deficit model to some extent, whereas I do see that the landscape has shifted quite a lot, and it's now seen as something that's a much more positive growth mindset, good to great kind of experience, as opposed to something that needs to be fixed.
I think in the old days, I mean, I've been coaching since the 90s, so I'm a bit of an old stooge, and certainly in the old days, there used to be kind of an almost, why am I being asked to be coached? Or why do I need a coach? It shows I'm weak in some ways. And actually nowadays it's much more about, has nothing to do with whether you're strong or weak. It's about your development and your growth, and being a leader, particularly a senior leader leading a big enterprise. You're definitely still in that place of still growing. I think the day you get to think, I don't need to grow anymore, that's the day you stop being a leader, really. It's where I come from. So coaching very much goes hand in hand with that.
And it's, I suppose, more accepted now that that premise of emotional intelligence, which is that skills and experience and knowledge matter, but they're not the differentiators. The differentiators are behaviours and styles and approach. And I think that has become a much more accepted sort of state of being.
Yes. I'm inclined to agree. I think the open-mindedness of leaders and organizations and their HR teams and everything is much, much more about how do we keep growing, and not so much from a profit or success point of view on the monetary side, but in terms of our ability to innovate, our capacity to lead, our levels of self-awareness. All of that is very, very much on the agenda for organizations in this day and age. Really, I think it's more unusual for it not to be.
Yes.
Than for it to be, which is a really great shift to see, actually.
It is. And I wonder what the next shift will be, because there's bound to be one. And so
yes. Well, it's going to keep evolving, isn't it? So
absolutely. Yeah.
So I cannot not ask you about this, because I know that you're a mum. You've got 3 wonderful daughters, and who are just gorgeous. They're the image of you, beautiful girls they are. And you've got your partner, and you're a working mum. How do you navigate that? I'm sure lots of people watching would love to hear more about how do you navigate having a busy family life, fulfilling family life, and doing the busy, fulfilling job you're doing?
Through juggling, actually. And I think, I mean, any working mum or dad would acknowledge that one of there's a constant guilt that comes with you. I think guilt that you're not giving your children necessarily enough attention, and guilt that you're not sometimes giving your job the attention that you want to give it. And I think, I've had to learn to accept that I won't be perfect at everything, because it's just not possible to be perfect at everything. And actually, no one expects me to be perfect at everything either. And I think that for me has been a real learn, because I'm one of the things that comes with that achievement drive that I've got is a really high standard setting for oneself, and you're never going to live up to it generally, actually, but particularly when you've got 3 little people to steer along. And particularly in 2020, which was probably one of the hardest years of my professional career, in terms of just the pressure that we were under as a business to protect our staff and protect jobs and protect the business, but also our clients facing huge crisis, and then homeschooling and lockdown being thrust upon us. And it just felt that whereas I'd been juggling and spinning plates, that that pressure really rose. So I don't know that I've nailed it, Mary. I think some days I feel more on top of it than others, but I have become incredibly organised at pre-planning for work and for home, so that I can manage all of that admin. And I have also learned to ask for help, whether that's from my parenting network around things I need for the children, or from my partner in negotiating, time that we both need for our jobs, or whether it's actually being able to influence what was already a very agile, flexible working environment that we've got at GatenbySanderson. I think that's another thing I would observe. And I know not all women or men who are parents have the benefit of this, but we are in a really flexible working environment where I don't feel I am measured on inputs, I'm measured on outputs. And so if I choose to get up at 5:30 and do some emails before the kids wake up, and then go for a run, and then work late into the evening, and the job gets done and it gets done well, then that's okay.
Yes.
And I hope more employers will start to accelerate along that journey if they haven't already, and I know many have.
Yes. It's going to be interesting to see what transpires at the end of this, as to whether that flexibility of the way and how people work will be sustained going forward. It's just been some interesting commentaries going on from the government around that as well, which I'm not sure about. But anyway, we won't go down that one for the time being. So I'm conscious we're getting to the end of our time. It always goes so quickly. I just wonder what wisdom you'd like to pass on to the people watching today, in terms of, we have been through one hell of a year. We are still all here. We're, navigating forward. Hopefully things will start to get easier, but there's still a lot of uncertainty around. So what would be your sort of final words be to those that are watching, in terms of advice that you'd like to pass on, Jody?
I think being kind to oneself, and we all know the textbook things we need to do to stay resilient and give ourselves some mental headspace. But for me, I've really consciously in this last year focused more on my well-being from an exercise and a looking after myself perspective. I think probably because I was on the brink some days and I knew I had to. And I also met so many clients last year who were really grappling with some really complex challenges and failing to invest in time for themselves. And I could see the impact that was having. I think the other thing that I've done through the course of 2020, because of what has happened with the pandemic, has been I have really reflected, I think probably consciously for the first time in many years, on the strengths and sort of natural preferences I have that are really well suited to my job, and the things that perhaps are not such natural strengths that are potential derailers that came to almost an ugly head some days during a really tough year, but also just remembering to put strategies in place to mitigate against those. So I think it's actually reflecting on what it is about yourself that is a good fit for your job and not so good a fit job, and there'll be both. And just reconciling to that and saying it doesn't matter if everything about me is not a perfect fit to where I need to take this business next. It's actually about making sure you're consciously aware of those and not letting them derail you.
So what I'm hearing is practice self-compassion, play to your strengths, be conscious of where your non-strengths are, and have strategies in place to counterbalance those, is what I'm hearing.
I think so, yeah. And the other reflection I've had as a final word is that I look back on all the leadership jobs I've had from when I was a frontline supervisor to the role I have now. And I think increasingly one learns to just be yourself and bring your whole self to work and just, be a role model in that sense. I used to try and compartmentalize work and home a lot. Everything from don't befriend work colleagues on Facebook to, just put on that professional front. And I think it's really important that you're willing to bring more of yourself to work just so you can be a more authentic individual. And actually people then feel that they've got the support or that they can reach out for that support if they need you.
Yes. So stop pretending, be yourself. Fantastic. Lovely words to leave us with. Thank you so much, Jody. It's been so lovely talking to you today, and I look forward to being in touch at some point in the future as well. If you've been watching today, or if you're watching in catch up, do make your comments below. I will let Jody know if you pass any remarks on to her, and she can respond, and also I'll respond too. And do join me next week. We have Gregory, who is a phenomenal business builder who is currently building a charity called Drive Change for Good. Wonderful, inspiring leader we'll be having next week. So see you next week, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks, Jody.